Okay, so today we're really getting into it, taking a deep dive into the world of EMTs.
Oh, yeah.
But not the stuff you usually see on TV dramas.
Right, right.
You've sent over a really fascinating mix of resources,
Okay.
mainly focusing on Chapter 2 of that Emergency Care and Transportation textbook.
Yeah,
The Emergency Care and Transportation of the Sick and Injured textbook, that's the full title,
I know that one.
and some accompanying slides.
Okay.
So we're talking safety and wellness, but for the EMTs
Oh,
themselves.
interesting.
This is the stuff that makes or breaks their ability to do this incredibly demanding job.
Yeah, what strikes me is how much emphasis is placed on the mental and emotional side of things.
Oh, yeah.
Not just the physical risks, which you would think.
Right, of course, of course.
These are the folks who run into chaos
Yeah,
when everyone else is running out,
it's true.
That takes a toll.
Absolutely. And the textbook does not sugarcoat it.
No, I bet.
It straight up says that self-care in this job, it's not a luxury. It's practically a survival skill.
Yeah, you got to take care of yourself if you're going to take care of others, right?
Exact.
And that's where this whole concept of wellness comes in.
Okay.
It's not just about avoiding burnout.
Right.
It's about actively building up that resilience.
Okay.
So you can face those intense situations without totally falling apart.
It's like training for a marathon,
Yes.
but for your mind.
Exactly. Exactly. And the resources you shared, they really lay out the training regimen.
Yeah, yeah.
We're talking sleep, diet, exercise, even something as simple as building strong relationships.
Yeah, it all plays into it.
It really does, yeah.
Speaking of sleep, that number really surprised me.
Oh, yeah? Which one?
That nearly half of EMS personnel are only getting less than 6 hours of sleep a day.
Oh, yeah.
It's crazy.
It's wild. And then people wonder why fatigue is a major concern in this field, right?
Less than 6 hours. That's less than a new parent.
I know, it's rough.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, there's a big push for things like shorter shifts,
Okay.
better access to healthy food options at work.
Makes sense.
Some places are even looking into designated nap times.
Really?
Yeah. You can't mess around with sleep deprivation when lives are on the line.
No kidding.
Mm,
A tired EMT, that could be the difference between life or death for a patient.
exactly.
Speaking of life or death, we have to talk about infectious diseases.
Yeah.
That's another big one.
That's a huge occupational hazard for EMTs, for sure.
Okay, infectious diseases.
Yeah.
That's a happy thought.
Right.
But seriously, the textbook does a deep dive on this. They
Yeah.
even go so far as to break down the difference between something being infectious
Mm,
and something being communicable.
right, right.
And it turns out you can have one without the other.
Exactly. It's not always both.
Which is wild.
Yeah. And it gets even more wild when you think about all the different ways diseases can actually spread.
Oh, I know.
Direct contact,
Mhm.
indirect contact, airborne,
Right.
foodborne, vector-borne.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Right. We're talking a whole buffet of transmission possibilities here.
It's like they're working in a real-life game of Contagion, that video game.
It really is. And the scary part is they kind of are.
Yeah.
That's why EMTs are trained to operate under this assume everyone is infected mentality.
Oh, wow.
It's all about minimizing risk,
Right.
regardless of who the patient is or what they might have.
So what does that look like in action, this assume everyone is infected mindset?
So think PPE,
Okay.
your gloves, eye protection, gowns, masks, the whole 9 yards.
They don't mess around?
No. And they don't just tell you to wear it. They get into the nitty-gritty details of how to use it properly.
Oh, right. Like that whole glove removal technique?
Yeah, yeah.
It was like a whole choreographed dance for your hands,
It's very specific.
just to make sure you don't contaminate yourself taking off your gloves.
It's all about breaking those bad habits.
Yeah.
It's better to be safe than sorry, especially when you're dealing with this stuff day in and day out.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about those N95 masks.
So this is sunshine.
They really hammered home the importance of getting a proper fit,
Yeah.
which of course, ties back to those OSHA guidelines.
Of course, can't forget about OSHA.
Right, right.
And of course, we can't forget about those CDC recommended immunizations for healthcare workers.
Right, those are important.
You've got your hepatitis B, influenza, MMR.
Yeah.
These are non-negotiables.
Right.
For protecting both the EMTs and the people that they're helping.
So it's a whole system of safeguards.
It really is, yeah.
So walk me through this. What happens if, despite all these precautions, an EMT thinks they've been exposed to something? What's the protocol?
So first things first, clean the affected area immediately.
Okay.
If it's your eyes, you're rinsing those babies out like there's no tomorrow.
Oh my gosh.
Then it's all about activating their department's infection control plan.
Okay.
Depending on what they were exposed to, There might be prophylactic treatments involved.
Prophylactic, wow.
Yeah, it's about containing that potential spread as quickly and effectively as possible.
They really don't mess around when it comes to infection control.
No, no, they can't. It's serious business.
Which makes sense given the environment that they're working in.
Right, right.
It's not all just bandages and sirens, is it?
No, not at all. In fact, speaking of intense environments,
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about the emotional toll this job takes.
Okay.
They're not just dealing with physical risks.
Right.
These are the folks that see trauma and death up close and personal, and they see it a lot.
Yeah, that's something you don't really think about when you see an ambulance go by.
No, not really. But it's got to be heavy stuff.
What does the textbook say about dealing with that kind of constant stress?
Well, they don't shy away from it, that's
All
for
right.
sure. They even call it the stressful reality of emergency care,
Oh, yeah.
which is pretty spot on. I
Yeah.
mean, imagine your heart racing, your pupils dilated, your muscles tense,
Mhm.
and that's just your body reacting to a routine call.
Wow, so even when it's not a life or death situation, their body is still in like fight or flight mode.
That's right, yeah.
That's intense.
And you can imagine how that kind of constant stress can manifest
Yeah.
over time.
Yeah.
They break it down into these different types of stress reactions.
Okay.
Acute, delayed, and cumulative stress.
So acute would be like right there in the moment.
Exactly, yeah, your immediate reaction.
What about the others?
So delayed stress is kind of insidious.
Okay.
It might not even hit you until hours or even days later.
Wow.
And then there's cumulative stress, which is the real killer.
Okay.
That's the slow burn. It's the result of facing these high-pressure situations day after day after day.
Right.
It can absolutely erode your resilience if you're not careful.
It's like the straw that breaks the camel's back,
Yes,
but with stress instead of straw.
exactly. And
Uh-huh.
the impact of that cumulative stress, it can be scary.
Yeah.
I'm talking fatigue, insomnia, irritability,
Right.
even physical problems like stomach issues and headaches, just constant.
It's like your body's waving a giant red flag.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, hello.
Pay attention.
Yeah.
And that's not even getting into the psychological impact.
Right. Right.
Potential depression, anxiety, guilt, even just feeling numb or emotionally detached.
Yeah.
It's a lot to handle.
It sounds like it. So how do they deal with all of this? They can't exactly clock out of stress.
No. And that's where critical incident stress management comes in,
Okay.
or CISM, that's often called.
C is
Yeah, think of it as a safe space for EMTs to process those really tough calls
okay.
with trained professionals
Yeah.
and peers who get it.
Right.
It's all about giving them the tools to cope with the emotional baggage that comes with the job.
So it's not just about being physically capable of doing the job.
Right.
It's about being mentally and emotionally equipped as well.
Exactly. It's the whole package.
It makes you realize how much goes on behind the scenes.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's not just about dealing with the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event, right? The textbook also talks about the long-term risks.
Yeah.
Things like burnout and compassion fatigue.
Compassion fatigue, it's a big one.
Yeah. It's like caring for others takes so much out of you
It does.
that you just have nothing left to give.
And EMTs are dealing with people at their most vulnerable,
Yeah,
often on the worst day of their lives.
absolutely.
And that constant exposure to suffering, it takes a toll.
So what are the warning signs of compassion fatigue? Like what should EMTs be looking out for in themselves and maybe even in their colleagues?
Well, if you're constantly exposed to trauma, it's only natural to start feeling emotionally drained and numb.
Yeah.
They might withdraw from their colleagues,
Right.
avoid certain types of calls,
Okay.
or even just become cynical and detached.
Yeah, I can see
It's
that.
like a defense mechanism.
Right.
But it can be a slippery slope.
Absolutely. And it's not just about the individual EMT either, right?
Right.
If one person is struggling, it can impact the whole team.
Absolutely. It's a domino effect.
Wow.
That's why recognizing the signs early on is so important.
Okay, so we've got physical risks.
Yeah.
Emotional stress, risk of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot to deal with. Is there anything in the materials about how they cope with all of this?
Yeah. The good news is there are resources available.
Okay, good.
Many EMS agencies offer counseling services,
Yeah.
peer support groups,
Okay.
specifically for first responders.
It's like they always say, you're no good to anyone if you don't take care of yourself first.
Exactly.
You got to put your own oxygen mask on first
100%.
before assisting others.
Yep.
That's the rule.
And it's not just about formal programs either.
Right.
Things as simple as making sure you're getting enough sleep,
Mhm.
eating healthy foods, staying active
Yeah.
can make a huge difference.
It's like we talked about before, treating it like training for a marathon.
Yes.
but for your mind.
Exactly. Exactly.
Got to keep in shape.
Does stay sharp.
Okay, so we've talked about the very real risks of the job,
Mm-hmm.
both physical and emotional. But there's more to it than just that, right?
Oh, yeah.
The textbook spends a lot of time on the legal side of things.
Oh, absolutely. That's where things get really interesting.
Oh, okay.
At least from a legal perspective.
Okay.
It's not just about knowing how to treat someone.
Right.
It's about understanding the very specific rules
Yeah.
and ethical boundaries that govern every decision an EMT makes.
That makes sense. After all, they are often making life or death decisions
Right.
in the heat of the moment.
All the time.
So they got to know what they're legally allowed to do.
Exactly. You got it. And it all starts with this one fundamental principle that seems so simple on the surface,
Okay.
but gets really complicated in practice. Do no further harm.
Do no further harm seems pretty straightforward.
Right.
Like, don't make it worse.
You'd think so, but think about it. What constitutes harm in a life or death situation?
That's a good point.
What if a patient refuses treatment that could save their life?
Right.
What if their loved ones are pressuring you to do something that goes against your training?
Yeah.
It's not always a clear-cut call.
No, not at all.
And speaking of tricky situations,
Yeah.
the textbook also spends a lot of time on the whole issue of consent.
Consent, yes, that's a big one.
It's a lot more complicated than just asking, is it okay if I treat you?
I imagine so.
They break it down into these different types of consent. Informed, expressed, implied, involuntary.
Wow, there's levels to this.
There are levels, and each one comes with its own set of rules
Okay.
and potential pitfalls.
So let's unpack that a bit.
Okay,
What are the key differences between those types of consent?
so you've got your basics like express consent, which
Mhm.
is when someone clearly says, yes, you have my permission to do this.
Right, right,
But then it gets tricky. What happens if someone is unconscious?
right.
That's where implied consent comes into play.
Right, because you can't exactly get verbal confirmation from someone who's passed out.
Exactly. But even then, there are rules. It has to be a life-threatening situation.
Okay.
And you have to act under the assumption that a reasonable person would want treatment.
Okay.
But what if they have a medical condition you don't know about?
Right, right.
Or what if they have religious beliefs that prohibit certain types of treatment? It's a judgment call every single time.
So it's about more than just knowing the right medical procedure.
Yes,
It's about knowing when you're legally and ethically allowed to perform that procedure.
exactly.
That's a lot.
And it gets even more complicated when you factor in situations with minors
Oh, of course.
or people who might not be mentally capable of giving consent.
Right.
That's where involuntary consent comes into play.
Wow. Okay.
But we should probably save that for another deep dive
That's
because there's a lot to unpack there.
agreed. This is already making my head spin.
Yeah.
You mentioned that a patient could refuse treatment, even if it's in their best interest.
Yeah.
What happens then? Do EMTs just have to respect their wishes, even if it could have really dire consequences?
That's the thing. They do.
Ellie.
One of the trickiest parts of this job is understanding that a conscious, rational adult has the right to refuse treatment, even if it means they could die.
Wow.
It goes back to that whole do no further harm principle.
Right.
Sometimes respecting someone's autonomy means honoring their wishes, even if you don't agree with them.
Wow. That's a heavy responsibility to carry.
Yeah, it is, and it's something that frequently ends up in court.
I bet.
So EMTs have to make sure they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's when it comes to documentation.
Right. If it's not documented, it didn't happen.
Exactly.
Speaking of documentation, the textbook also mentions something called an advance directive.
Oh yeah, advanced directives, these are like living wills,
Okay.
where someone specifies their wishes for medical care in case they become unable to communicate them.
So like a do not resuscitate order.
Exactly, a DNR.
Okay.
But here's the thing, and this is huge for EMTs.
Okay.
A DNR does not mean do not treat.
Oh,
It just means no CPR or other life-sustaining measures if their heart stops.
that's a really important distinction.
It is, it's a big one.
So even if someone has a DNR, EMTs might still provide other necessary medical care,
Exactly.
like oxygen, pain relief, that sort of thing.
Exactly. It's all about providing comfort and support,
Okay.
even if you're not actively trying to restart their heart.
Wow, there's so many nuances to this.
Oh, you have no idea. And we've only scratched the surface of the legal and ethical considerations EMTs face every single day.
It sounds like this job requires a law degree on top of medical training.
Almost. But seriously, the textbook does a good job of breaking down these essential legal concepts EMTs need to be aware of, like their scope of practice,
Right.
duty to act,
Mhm.
and even things like negligence, abandonment, Good Samaritan laws. We could do a whole nother deep dive just on those.
I bet. Okay, my brain is officially full of legal jargon.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I need a palate cleanser.
Okay, okay.
Didn't we see something in those slides about eustress?
Yes. Eustress?
It's not just some fancy European stress.
Right. It sounds like it could be.
It does. It does.
It's actually the good kind of stress.
Okay.
It's the kind that motivates you
Okay.
to be your best self.
So like the adrenaline rush you get when you're facing a challenge, but you know you've got this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think of an athlete in the zone
Okay.
or a musician nailing a big performance.
Right.
It's that feeling of being totally present, focused, energized.
Right.
In small doses, it can actually improve your performance
Okay.
and help you work more effectively under pressure.
I can see how that could be useful in emergency situations.
Absolutely.
But how do you keep it from tipping over into like regular old distress?
Right.
Because let's face it, this job is full of stress.
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
And it all comes down to recognizing the difference.
Okay.
Eustress is that short burst, that focused energy.
Right.
It helps you rise to the occasion.
Okay.
But when it's constant, when you never get a chance to recover, that's when it turns harmful.
Yeah, it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly.
And that probably goes back to all that stuff we talked about before.
Right.
The sleep, the healthy habits, the mental health support.
You got it. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Taking care of yourself, it's not just about feeling better.
Right.
It's about being able to show up as your best self
Right.
in those high-pressure moments.
This deep dive is really connecting the dots for me.
Good, good.
Yeah.
It's like a light bulb moment for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Realizing that those everyday choices,
Right.
how much sleep you're getting,
Mm-hmm.
what you're eating, how you're managing your stress,
Yeah.
those things directly impact your ability to do your job effectively,
It all matters.
especially in a high-stakes field like EMS.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of high stakes,
Oh.
I have to ask about something that's been bugging me a little bit
Okay.
since we started talking about all of this. The textbook keeps mentioning the National EMS Education Standard competencies.
Oh, yes.
What are those exactly?
Right.
Are they like the EMT commandments or something?
Not quite commandments,
Right.
but close.
Okay.
Think of them as the national guidelines
Okay.
that ensure all EMTs,
Right.
no matter where they're trained,
Mhm.
have the same baseline of knowledge and skills.
Okay.
It's about standardizing education.
Right. So it's like a quality control measure.
Exactly. And it's not just about checking boxes. These competencies cover a huge range of skills,
Okay.
from the obvious stuff like basic life support
Mm-hmm.
to more nuanced things like communication, teamwork,
Oh, wow.
even ethical decision-making.
So it's really about the whole package.
100%. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah.
EMTs are dealing with people,
Right.
not just symptoms.
Right.
They have to be able to think critically,
Yeah.
adapt to rapidly changing situations,
Right.
make tough calls, all while staying calm and compassionate.
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
After everything we've just gone through, I'm starting to think EMTs are superhuman or something.
Right. It might as well be.
Serious?
But seriously, it's a career that requires a unique blend of skills and personality traits.
I can imagine.
You can't teach someone to have compassion
Right.
or courage, but you can give them the tools and the knowledge
Right.
to use those traits effectively in the field.
It's about training and giving them the resources.
Exactly. And that's where these competencies come in.
This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes
Good.
to what goes into making a great EMT.
Yeah,
It's so much more than I ever realized.
it really is. And we're not even done yet.
Oh, no, there's more.
There's a whole other section in the textbook about scene safety.
Oh, right, because it's not just the patient they need to worry about, right?
Right.
It's the entire environment.
Exactly. We're talking potential hazards,
Oh, gosh.
fires, down power lines, hazmat spills, you name it.
Yeah.
And let's not forget about the risk of violence,
Oh, right, of course.
which is unfortunately a very real concern for EMTs.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
But it makes sense. They're going into these unpredictable situations.
Totally.
Sometimes in dangerous neighborhoods.
Absolutely. And let's not forget about those emotionally charged situations
Oh, right.
where people are panicked, scared, or even under the influence.
Right.
Things can escalate quickly.
So how do they stay safe when every call has the potential to be so unpredictable?
It all starts with situational awareness.
Okay.
They have to constantly be scanning the environment,
Right.
looking for potential red flags, and always having an escape route in mind, just in case.
So even before they treat a patient, they
Yeah.
have to assess the entire scene for potential danger.
Absolutely.
It's like they're walking into a live-action video game or something.
That's a pretty accurate analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't just rely on their instincts either.
Right.
There are specific protocols and safety procedures they follow to minimize risk.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, let's say there's a car accident
Okay.
and there are downed power lines.
Okay.
The EMTs won't even approach the vehicle until the power company has secured the scene.
Wow.
No heroics,
Look around.
just common sense
Hmm.
and following the rule.
Better to be safe than sorry.
Exactly.
Eh.
And when it comes to potentially violent situations,
Right.
it's all about de-escalation techniques.
De-escalation.
Yeah.
So that's like talking someone down from a ledge.
Right.
But instead of a ledge, it's a medical emergency.
You got it. It's about staying calm,
Oh, okay.
speaking in a soothing voice,
Right.
making eye contact,
Mm-hmm.
trying to build rapport.
Right.
Sometimes just listening to someone vent can be enough to diffuse a situation.
It sounds like it takes a lot of emotional intelligence to be an EMT.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, they might also be dealing with bystanders
Right.
who are freaking out or interfering with patient care.
Oh, gosh.
It's a whole other level of stress management.
Talk about a tough crowd.
Right. So they have to be medics, lawyers, and negotiators all rolled into one.
Sounds like it.
But seriously, the point is that scene safety is paramount in EMS.
Okay.
They even have specific guidelines for things like wearing reflective clothing at night,
Okay.
using caution when lifting, and moving patients,
Right.
and even just communicating effectively with other responders on the scene.
Right. It's all about teamwork, communication. Makes sense.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much thought goes into every aspect of this job.
It really is. And there's one more thing I want to touch on,
Okay.
which is this concept of cultural humility.
Cultural humility. What is that?
So it's about recognizing that EMTs are going to encounter people from all walks of life
Oh, for sure.
with different backgrounds, beliefs, and customs.
Absolutely.
And sometimes those differences can lead to misunderstandings
Of course.
or even conflict, especially in high-stress situations.
I can see that happening.
So cultural humility is about approaching each patient with an open mind,
Okay.
being respectful of their beliefs,
Right.
and avoiding making assumptions based on stereotypes or biases.
So it's about treating the whole person, not just the medical condition.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect,
Right.
regardless of their background or circumstances.
Yeah.
And that can be especially challenging in the middle of a chaotic emergency
I bet.
when emotions are running high.
So much to think about.
It is. It's a lot.
This deep dive has really been eye-opening for me.
It's been my pleasure to tag along on this journey with you.
Likewise.
It's always fascinating to delve into these topics and uncover the hidden complexities of a job that's often taken for granted.
Right, absolutely.
For sure.
Speaking of hidden complexities,
Okay.
there was one more thing from the textbook that I wanted to circle back to.
Yeah.
It's about the physiological and psychological effects of stress.
Oh, right.
They really go into detail about how the body responds to those fight or flight situations.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just about feeling anxious or stressed out.
Right.
There are actual measurable physiological changes
Right.
that occur when your body perceives a threat.
Yeah.
We're talking about the release of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol,
Right.
which cause your heart rate and blood pressure to spike,
Mm-hmm.
your breathing to become rapid and shallow,
Right.
your muscles tense up. It's like your body is preparing for battle.
Like, get ready to rumble.
Exactly.
It's wild how our bodies just do that automatically.
I know, right?
We don't even have to think about it.
It's like it have a mind of its own.
But like you said before, it's one thing to have those reactions every now and then.
Right.
It's another thing entirely to be dealing with them on a daily basis.
Right, like EMTs do.
Like EMTs do. Exactly.
Sorry.
And over time, that chronic stress can take a real toll on your health,
It can.
both physically and mentally.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about an increased risk of heart disease, digestive problems, sleep disorders, anxiety, depression. The list goes on.
And on, yeah.
It's like the body can only handle so much before it starts to wear down.
Exactly.
So knowing all of that,
Yeah.
what are some things EMTs can do to mitigate those risks?
Right.
Aside from all the healthy habits we already talked about, of course.
Of course. Well, one of the most important things is to have a strong support system in place,
Okay.
both personally and professionally.
So having people you can talk to
Yes.
who understand what you're going through
Exactly.
makes a world of
Well, it's
difference.
all the difference.
It's like that old saying, a burden shared is a burden halved.
Exactly. And that goes for both the good and the bad experiences.
Yeah.
Sharing those wins with your colleagues,
Yeah.
celebrating the saves, it all helps to balance out the tough calls
Right.
and prevent that sense of isolation that can contribute to burnout.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What about professional support?
Yeah.
What kind of resources are available to EMTs who might be struggling?
So many EMS agencies have peer support programs
Oh,
or even access to mental health professionals who
okay.
specialize in working with first responders.
That's great.
And there are also national organizations like the National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians,
Okay.
or NAEMT,
NAEMT,
that offer resources and support as well.
that's good to know because asking for help isn't always easy,
No, it's not.
especially in a field where you're supposed to be the one helping others.
That's right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's still a stigma, unfortunately, surrounding mental health,
Yeah.
especially in professions that are traditionally seen as tough and resilient.
Right, but I think we've clearly established that being an EMT requires a whole lot more than just physical toughness.
It does.
It's about emotional intelligence, mental resilience, and knowing when to reach out for support.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And speaking of support,
Okay.
I think it's time we shifted gears and talked about something a little less intense. What do you say we dive into the world of infectious diseases?
Okay, I'm game.
Okay.
But just to warn you, my definition of less intense might be different from yours.
Fair enough, but trust me, this is fascinating stuff.
Okay.
The textbook really breaks down the specific types of infectious diseases
Okay.
that EMTs are most likely to encounter on the job,
Yeah.
as well as the precautions they take to protect themselves and their patients.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just washing your hands and using hand sanitizer here.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
We're talking about a whole system of safeguards
Okay.
designed to prevent the spread of potentially deadly pathogens.
All right. I'm intrigued.
Good, good.
Hit me with your best shot.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest infectious threats that EMTs face?
Well, some of the usual suspects are hepatitis B and C,
Okay.
HIV/AIDS,
Right.
and tuberculosis.
Right.
These are serious diseases
Right.
that can have long-term health consequences. So it's crucial for EMTs to take every precaution to minimize their risk of exposure.
That makes sense. So how do they protect themselves from something as contagious as, say, tuberculosis?
Well, for starters, they're trained to recognize the signs and symptoms,
Okay.
which can include a persistent cough,
Okay.
chest pain,
Right.
coughing up blood.
Okay, so early identification is key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if they suspect a patient might have TB,
Right.
they'll take additional precautions,
Okay.
like wearing an N95 mask,
Yeah. Right.
which filters out those airborne particles,
Right.
and potentially even isolating the patient to prevent further spread.
It's amazing how much goes on behind the scenes to keep everyone safe.
It is.
It's like a carefully choreographed dance of infection control.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of choreography,
Yes.
remember that elaborate glove removal technique we talked about earlier?
Oh, yeah?
The one where it's like a 5-step process just to take off a pair of gloves?
It's very intricate.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's all part of that same mindset. Breaking the chain of infection at every possible point.
It's like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. And that's especially true when you're dealing with diseases that can have such serious long-term consequences.
So it's not just about protecting themselves.
Right.
It's about protecting their patients and
Yeah.
the wider community as well.
Precisely. It's about understanding that every interaction,
Right.
every patient encounter,
Yeah.
has the potential to spread infection.
Right.
And by following these protocols,
Right.
EMTs are playing a vital role in public health and disease prevention.
You know, it's funny, when you think about EMTs,
Yeah.
you don't usually think about them being on the front lines of public health.
Right.
But it makes so much sense when you consider the environments they work in,
Right,
the
yeah.
situations they encounter.
Absolutely.
It's like they're these invisible guardians protecting us from unseen threats.
That's a really powerful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it highlights the fact that being an EMT is about so much more than just providing medical care in the moment.
Right.
It's about understanding that bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
the interconnectedness of health and safety,
Right.
and the ripple effects that their actions can have.
It's like they're juggling a million things at once.
It is.
The immediate needs of the patient, their own safety, the safety of bystanders,
Yeah.
infection control.
Right.
And on top of all that, they have to be constantly aware of the legal and ethical implications of every decision they make.
It's a lot to handle,
Yeah, it is.
and it takes a special kind of person to do it well.
I bet.
And speaking of doing it well,
Yeah.
remember those national EMS education standard competencies we talked about earlier?
Right. The EMT commandments.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, those competencies really come into play when you start thinking about the ethical dilemmas
Okay.
that EMTs face on a regular basis.
Ethical dilemmas. Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, picture this. You're an EMT, responding to a call for a patient who is refusing treatment.
Okay.
You arrive on scene, and you can clearly see that this person is in bad shape,
Yeah.
but they're adamant
Okay.
that they don't want your help.
Right.
What do?
Oh, wow. That's a tough one.
Right.
I mean, on the one hand, you want to respect the patient's autonomy,
Right.
their right to make their own decisions about their health care.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, you can see that they're not thinking clearly.
Right.
And you know that if you don't intervene, they could die.
Exactly. And there's no easy answer. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It's about weighing those risks and benefits,
Yeah.
considering the patient's mental state
Right.
and their capacity to make informed decisions,
Right.
and sometimes even consulting with medical control or legal counsel.
Sounds like a lot of pressure.
It is a lot of pressure.
How do EMTs even begin to process those kinds of ethical dilemmas,
Right.
especially when they're in the heat of the moment and they have to make a decision quickly?
It really is. And that's where experience, training, and good judgment come into play.
Okay.
EMTs are taught to assess a patient's mental status
Okay.
and determine if they're capable of understanding the potential consequences of their decisions.
Right.
But it's not always clear-cut.
Right.
And sometimes they just have to rely on their gut instincts and their understanding of the law.
So it's not just about memorizing medical procedures and legal definitions.
Right.
It's about knowing how to apply that knowledge in these real-world situations,
Yeah.
often under incredibly stressful circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that makes this job so challenging, but also so rewarding.
Right.
Because when you're able to navigate those ethical gray areas effectively,
Mm.
you're not just providing medical care.
Right.
You're upholding someone's dignity and autonomy,
Right.
even in their most vulnerable moments.
That's a really powerful way to think about it.
It is.
Like you said before, it's about treating the whole person, not just the medical condition.
Exactly. And it's something that EMTs do every single day, often without any recognition or fanfare.
They really are unsung heroes.
They are.
Yeah.
And on that note,
Yeah.
I think we've done a pretty thorough deep dive
We really have.
into the world of EMT safety and wellness.
Yeah.
What do you say we wrap things up?
Sounds good to me. My brain is officially full.
Mine too. But in a good way.
In a good way.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much you can learn about a topic when you really take the time to dig into it.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I think we extracted some really valuable insights from these resources that you shared.
I think so too. We covered so much ground today, from the importance of self-care,
Yeah.
stress management,
Mhm.
the complexities of infectious disease control,
Absolutely.
ethical decision-making.
It's been a wild ride.
It really has. But I think this deep dive has given us a whole new appreciation for the challenges and rewards of being an EMT. It's a demanding job, no doubt about it.
Right.
But it's also incredibly important and rewarding.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to sign off.
Until next time.
To all you EMTs out there, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you for all that you do.